devrais m'excuser pour ne pas faire cette présentation en français, mais je n'ai pas assez de vocabulaire et c'est déjà un peu difficile en anglais. I hope you can understand what I'm saying. So, I'd like to propose we account for the possibility of the pedestal in the cinema's context, in a slightly different perspective from those presented this morning, though. I mean, I'd like us to reflect on the mediation instrument that in cinema shapes the access of an audience to a film, by not only deciding at what time and where this audience will be able to see a particular film, but also by designing the context of images this film will be presented in. My proposal is then for us to consider the notion of cinema programming and then to observe the stand of this notion within a particular programming work. What is cinema programming? On the etymological root of the word programming, that stems from the Greek prographein, we find the idea of a previous writing that serves the preparation of a public event. The program is what results from that writing, a document that shows the order by which each presentation will be presented within the public event. The program is then an agenda, an index. Its parts relate to the parts of something that didn't happen or has been seen yet. The word programming is used in various contexts, and going through these uses gives us a clue on the problems the notion raises, also in cinema. It is, for instance, the algorithm description in the computer context, the description of a series of elementary actions and the order by which these actions should be executed so that something, a game, a web page, a computer application, can work properly. In the economical context, it is a technique for managing the access of several activities to the same resource. In museums, it is a mediation instrument used to link the several participants and corresponding jobs in the functioning of the museum, and in the arts context, it is the act of planning the order by which pieces that take time, that have a duration, will be presented. Pieces like theater plays, dance, presentations, films. In dictionaries, the word program is usually defined as being the result of the programming act. It is usually something like an instruction manual or a plan. In the case of the arts, a timetable. There are some exceptions to this. In television, program is the basic element assembled by the programmer, and in the political or educational context, program is more exactly not what results from a programming act, but what gives orientation to it. These last two exceptions are then particularly important to us, as they reveal that programming is always something between two programs. It follows and designs a program. Programming is then always to put something to work in a defined, by a program, way. And the program is an agenda in the true sense of the word. So programming is then, and to sum up, a previous and predictive act by which, on one hand, a use or access is designed, and on the other hand, an act by which one establishes the order in time, a succession, for actions to be presented or accomplished. The basic elements of a computer application, the jobs of the participants in the construction of a museum, the access of economical activities to a set of resources, a series of theater plays presentations, a series of films. By that succession, by that articulation of elements, a whole is established. Something that happens, functions, or is seen because its parts are put to work, but that can't be resumed, or summed up and is not completed within those parts. And that's why I call it a whole and not an ensemble or a group. Finally, these basic elements or parts can be assembled in many, in theory, infinite ways. Every act of programming, because it is a particular assemblage of a set of basic elements, is always an act of recontextualization. In cinema, because it is a work done with images, programming is something that can be approximated to montage. The juxtaposition of parts, the shots, the sequences, that by their articulation and order establish a whole that happens and is in movement and can't be reduced to its parts. This is briefly how Deleuze describes the cinematic image mouvement. In a second degree, cinema programming can be approximated to the concept of instabilité, developed by Jean Epstein, an unstable form that shows and works in movement, the movement it sees. Like cinema is the creation of a movement, its own, over another movement, that of things, objects in the world, programming may be the creation of a movement over another, that of films. You see then the peculiarity of this potential pedestal I'm here to discuss. It is one that takes the form of the object it exposes. There is something cinematic about programming, as there is something programmatic about cinema. What I propose is for us to think about the programming gesture not only as a means for exposing cinema, but a potentially cinematic act in itself. So, to think about all this, I'd like us to consider Essential Cinema, a series of programs that Anthology Film Archives has put together and has been presenting and is still presenting today since the moment it opened its doors in 1970. It integrates around 330 films. Some very few have been added since they first started to be shown, and these films are distributed by around 110 programs. At the beginning, Essential Cinema was all Anthology did or programmed, and so we find the agenda that conducts this programming act in the agenda of Anthology Film Archives themselves. That is very much implicated with the New American Cinema own agenda. In a manifesto distributed on Anthology's opening day, December 1st, 1970, Anthology is presented as being part of a strategy to promote the New American Cinema, and the people who assembled these programs are the filmmakers, the critics, theorists who made or were interested in defending and promoting this new cinema. Jonas Mekas, to begin with, who made up the name New American Cinema and was probably its main instigator, responsible for many of the initiatives that led to Anthology's foundation. This New American Cinema receives other names along Mekas texts, or texts written by other people connected to this new cinema, or even in texts written by those who studied this movement. It may be considered a period in American, particularly New Yorker filmmaking, starting around the end of the 50s, going all the way through the 70s. Or it can be considered a particular, specific kind of filmmaking. Sorry, I'm losing my breath. The names it receives reveal then characteristics of this specific filmmaking, and they will be important to give us a clue on the direction the films assembled in Essential Cinema follow. To begin with, the term new expresses a differentiation will, a reaction against the forms and logic of an old cinema, namely the Hollywood system-based cinema. Then the most commonly used as an equivalent to the New American Cinema is the term avant-garde, that besides the characteristics already raised by the word new, is also used to express the inventiveness, the breakthrough attitude of this cinema. Another term commonly used is experimental. Jonas Mekas, for instance, uses it to describe the importance of the individual expression and intuition, the hand of the filmmaker, and this affirmation as the true author of the film. In general, experimental is a term used to express the tendency towards experiments with film's material, form, and structure. The following terms are two subsidiary terms of this one, used not exactly as synonyms for New American Cinema, but usually applied to refer to branches of it. They reveal important characteristics of this cinema we must account for, though. These other terms are poetic, that refers to a primacy of form, and its freeing from narrative and other constraints not directly involved in essentially filmic elements, and the term abstract, or cineplastics, that relates to a more radical tendency among the poetic film, one that tends to revolve around particular types of forms, such as lines, sounds, scraps from other films, or drawings and colors. Abstract films are those that use abstract forms or that make them abstract. Finally, this cinema is said to be independent and underground, terms that refer to its conditions of distribution and production. It is an underground, hidden, difficult to see, unknown cinema, and it is also a cinema done outside the industrial cinema, a cinema that praises the non-professionalism of its makers. This allows us to start grasping the program or agenda Essential Cinema is meant to fulfill, and so the direction or orientation of the work done with the films. The other important element to define this pre-program or agenda is to know, as it is said by the programmers themselves, that this series is an attempt to define the art of cinema, is meant to give access to a concentrated and crystallized history of cinema, cinematic medium, or art of film. Knowing that this history will be told within a landscape of a particular cinema, called at times New American Cinema, avant-garde, experimental, independent, or underground cinema, we sense this will not be a classic history or a history for all cinema. On the other side of the programming work stands the organization of the films within the programs and how they are meant to be used or seen. At the beginning, the programs were presented repeatedly in monthly cycles. Nowadays, it takes approximately a year to see all the programs. The idea of a cycle is more rarefied, but the repetition dynamics has been maintained. That's why the programmers of Anthology Film Archives speak of the essential cinema as a repertory. It is a series of fixed programs. A program is what the programmers call to each session a path to follow within the whole. The modes of articulation and ordering are also fixed within the programs. Each session is called after the filmmaker or filmmakers assembled. Inside each session, the work of each filmmaker is presented chronologically from the older to the most recent work included. Finally, when a program gathers the work of different filmmakers, their work is never really mixed up. In one session, we can't start by seeing, let's say, a Warhol film, then see a James Whitney's film, and then go back to Warhol. It is not the film, then, that leads the articulation work and provokes the approach of another one. That is reserved to an œuvre, to the whole work of an author. This concentration on the name of the author shows us in part how the programming work of essential cinema can explicitly become an instrument for a previous program or agenda. One that, in this case, as we have seen, runs inside the New American Cinema that praised the importance of individual expression and stated the filmmaker as the true author of the film. It is not by chance that in all the texts connected to this movement, at least the ones written by Jonas Mekas and P. Adam Sidney, both programmers of this series, both directors of Anthology Film Archives, and probably the ones who most wrote on this cinema from inside, it is not by chance, I was saying, that these men always divide the word filmmaker into filmmaker. The other way we can see how this series works inside the landscape provided by that particular cinema is by going through the list of authors assembled. There are basically three groups within this list. All of them, in a way or another, we'll see which, are related to the or an avant-garde film practice. Of all the 85 filmmakers included, 27 are present in the catalogue of the Filmmakers Cooperative, a distribution non-profit center created by the New American Cinema Group. Around 20 more filmmakers, although not present in the cooperative's catalogue, are recognizably related to the avant-garde film practice in America of the 60s, 70s. That means that a little more than half of the filmmakers included are related to the avant-garde film in America, contemporary of the construction of this series. And we should keep in mind at this point that an announced objective of these programs was to show a history of cinema. Around 20 of the remaining filmmakers are related to the generally accepted history of the avant-garde film, the French avant-garde from the 20s, the German avant-garde filmmaking of the same years, the Soviet revolutionary avant-garde of the 30s, or are filmmakers related with the generally accepted history of the experimentalism in cinema, filmmakers such as Cocteau, Feuillade, or Jean Vigo, among others. Only 25% of the filmmakers remain, 15 names, among which an avant-garde film practice is more difficult to grasp. This group includes the Lumière brothers and Méliès, Griffith, Robert Bresson, Roberto Rossellini, Yasujiro Ozu, Marcel Anou from the Nouvelle Vague, but not Godard or Truffaut, important characters of the same movement, Jean Renoir, Leni Riefenstahl, Charles Chaplin, Buster Keaton, or Laurel and Hardy, the only non-filmmakers included in these programs. And these, just to name a few of the 15 remaining filmmakers. We see right away that this is not a revision of all of the cinema classics. There's not Hitchcock, Ford, Hawks, or Lang. There's not Kurosawa also, only Ozu from the Japanese cinema. On the presentation of the programs, we start to get an idea on what was meant to be stressed out by this non-obvious combination. For instance, The Triumph of the Will by Leni Riefenstahl is presented as a masterpiece of style and editing. The Nazi propaganda is obscured by the filmmaker's contribution to the art of cinema, this presentation says. Presenting Marcel Anon, Une Simple Histoire, it said that more than a narrative, we'll see a rigorous, disciplined, formal, stylistic exercise. From Renoir, La Règle du Jeu, programmers praise its complexity and inexhaustibility, and they present Laurel and Hardy as the quintessential Dumb and Dumber. There is an insistence on ideas like form and style, behind ideas like rigor or discipline or complexity, or in other way, editing. We sense the importance given to structure. And in the use of the word quintessential, used to present Laurel and Hardy, we see the relevance given to the idea of a model or of something reduced or elevated to its pure state, confirmed by the manifesto I've mentioned, where the programmers say they are committed to the pure film. The keynote is the use of cinematic instruments and the exposure of that use on the film's surface. About Bresson, in an article written by Sidney and published in this volume on essential cinema that joins some essays written on the films included in this programming, he even said that he analyzes the elements of his narrative through the very means of which he presents it. The words and ideas used to describe the work of these filmmakers, form, purity, structure, style, are then the same we've seen constituting the semantic field that surrounds the new American cinema. And just to give an example, even though Sidney, on the same article on Bresson I just mentioned, says explicitly he is not an avant-gardist, he at the same time centers his analysis of Bresson's work on aspects he relates to the avant-garde. For instance, his anti-conventionalism, the work on film's frontiers, the reduction of expressiveness, a particular exploration of metonymy, just to name a few. Being through the use of a particular vocabulary, being by pointing out how these filmmakers participate in aspects of an avant-garde film practice, what is stressed out in the work of these remaining 15 authors is the special attention they give to film form and its reinvention within the film practice. What seems to be stressed out is the avant-gardism of these non-avant-garde filmmakers. So we see that the set of filmmakers assembled in essential cinema is all related to a fabricated landscape of avant-garde filmmaking. The America avant-garde filmmaking, the classics of avant-garde in cinema, and those filmmakers related to a practice that shares research and interests with the avant-garde film practice. A practice defined among this group as one that explores and exposes the essential elements of the cinematic medium. It is not by chance that the programmers say they will present an history of the medium, and in fact, essential or essentialism is a word often used in film studies to refer to a particular research based on a medium, a research on what we can take out of the instrument cinema before we can no longer call something a film. We see in the description of the programs that this programming is interested in the films that represent or allow the programmers to tell what is essential in cinema. And we see then that essential cinema is not only a gathering of the essential, the fundamental, the must-see films, it is a history of a cinema of the fundamental, a cinema of the essential. These programs are meant to show the essentials of an essentialist cinema. The programming work here is then a way of telling a history of a very particular cinema and a way of defining that cinema. And it is a way of putting films to work towards that definition. Or maybe I shouldn't say the films in this case. As we've seen, the articulation is done with the work of an author, not with a separate film. Maybe we should call it a family. The programming of essential cinema is the establishment of a cinematic family, or an aire de famille, to use Epstein's term, a family resemblance. Something like an abstract feeling that makes what was different and separated be a part of the same whole. To end this presentation, I show you a quote from a speech Jonas Mekker made at the Philadelphia College of Art on June 1966, then published under the title, Where Are We, the Underground? Here, Mekker describes and characterizes the generation of the new American cinema we've been talking about. A generation, he says, caught by the war at a young age, a typically idealist age, a war that shattered him, that left him amid ruins, a feeling he found, among others, when he arrived to New York around 1950. This feeling left him the necessity to collect his broken pieces, Collection is here described as an act of recognition, of finding oneself by collecting the things of others. And this makes an echo on how the collector was for Walter Benjamin, someone who, like the historian, saves the past by recognizing and gathering the fragments of this past. And then someone who, in that movement of recognition and then of articulation of the fragments, draws a constellation, an image created by all those bits and pieces of the past. The act of preparing the Essential Cinemas programs was also the act of creating Anthology's collection. This collection and this programming seem to have been instruments to create a constellation and a family of forms for a generation of filmmakers, those of the underground Meccas is talking about. To collect, to articulate, to show repeatedly seem to have been ways to deal with the ruins. That's it.